Welcome to Have a Life Teaching, the podcast designed for educators who are dedicated to enhancing their teaching practice and creating a positive impact on their students' lives. In each episode, we'll dive deep into the world of education, exploring a wide range of topics related to curriculum, instruction, and assessment in K-12 schools. Together, we'll learn from the brightest minds in the education field. So if you're a passionate educator who's ready to take your teaching practice to the next level, join us as we explore the exciting world of education. My name is John Shimbari, signing in and saying, let's have a life teaching. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Have a Life Teaching podcast. So as many of my listeners know, as many of you know, post-COVID, we had large-scale teacher quit movements. We've had the quiet quit movement. We see many teachers leaving the field, either because they want to do something else that might be a little less stressful, or maybe they're even retiring, because we had a large number of baby boomer teachers who are now leaving and retiring and going on to greener pastures and doing other things in their second, third careers. But again, we also have a large number of teachers who aren't yet ready for retirement, who are leaving because of the stresses. And so what this has really caused, it has caused, in some ways, more opportunity for people to get their toes wet and decide if teaching is for them as substitutes. But on the other hand, are our substitutes really are they really prepared to meet the needs of our students? And I'll give a very quick example. As a consultant, I'm currently working in a school system where 2 teachers recently quit, and the school system does not hire long-term subs. So there are different subs in that classroom, if not on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, and the quality of instruction that those students are getting is really suffering. And I also have a neighbor, and something similar is happening in their school system. So if these are just 2 examples that I have off the top of my head, we know that this is becoming a systemic issue in education. So with that in mind, I'm really excited to have joining us as my guest tonight on the podcast, Megan Conklin. Megan is founder of Conklin Educational Perspectives in Washington State, and she is also partnering with the Washington State Education Association on a fantastic project that is designed to support the needs of emergency substitutes. So she's going to be walking us through what this project is and why other places, other school systems, other states might want to adopt a more proactive approach when it comes to the training of subs. So Megan, thank you so much for being with us today.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
How did a focus on preparing substitutes for the world that they're about to enter in schools, how did that become your area of specialization or interest?
Well, I worked straight out of my teacher prep program as a classroom teacher. I was a middle and high school ELA teacher for many years. And then I helped launch my high school or my school district's instructional coaching program with my colleague Heather. So I was a secondary person. She was the the elementary person, and we launched instructional coaching. So I worked as a coach for about 8 years. And then I stayed home for a season. I have 4 kids of my own. I was pregnant with kid number 4. I was tired of telling bosses that I was pregnant. So I decided to just take a leave, and I stayed home with my own kids for a while. When I went back into education, I entered as a sub, and I had never substitute taught before. And I immediately learned 2 things. Number 1, I loved it. I loved being a sub. It was the perfect fit for me. I'm a person who values novelty over consistency. I like something new every day, and I love a challenge. And number 2, I learned that subbing is a completely different skill set than being a classroom teacher. And it was really, really interesting to me. So I subbed for a while. I loved it. Things were fairly normal. And then 2020, COVID. And I stayed home here in Washington. We had online learning for quite a long time. And I stayed home and homeschooled and online schooled with my own kids. And when I went back to subbing, when we went back to in-person learning, it was a completely different landscape than when I was subbing before. We needed subs so desperately. Teachers were out for weeks at a time. We had mandatory times that people had to be out. And because of that, in Washington State, we lowered the gates for who could be a substitute. And I know that happened all across the country and all across the world, probably because we just needed so many more. And the group that we relied on almost exclusively was retired teachers. And at that time, people who were at the age of retirement were not wanting to go into schools. So we had a crisis and we had a huge shortage. So we had 15,000 emergency certified subs enter our ranks here in Washington State. And that is a lot of emergency certified subs. And I was subbing right next door to them. And here's one story that I always like to tell, because this is when it was an aha moment for me. I was subbing in a kindergarten class. I have a lot of friends who teach kindergarten. I'm a high school person by trade, but I end up in a lot of kindergarten classrooms. And it was buddy day, fourth grade buddy day. So our fourth grade buddies were going to come into the classroom and meet us. And guess what? Fourth graders had a sub as well. So 2 subs in the classroom with about 45 students. Everyone's going crazy. We needed to get them lined up, take them out to the playground. We were going to walk the track. So really quickly, I just stopped and I did this. And you know what happens next? All of the students stopped. They clapped back at me. We lined up and we walked out. And as we're walking out, I see the other sub. He leans down to one of the 4th graders and he says, "Why didn't you tell me you had a clapping thing?" And the kid just kind of looked at him and ran off. And at the time I smiled to myself and I thought that's kind of amusing. But later that night, as I was telling the story to my husband and I was processing the day, I was wondering to myself, why doesn't this person have even the most basic skills and strategies that you need to be successful in a classroom? That is when we started sub-communities. So my colleague Amanda and I, we worked together in North Thurston Public Schools as instructional coaches. So we designed a lot of professional development for teachers, and we know about adult learners. So I have a kind of unique background that has led me to this place. And so she and I sat down and we designed a gathering for subs, and we designed it just like we design lessons in our classroom, where connection happens first. So there's connection that happens. We eat a meal together in our sub communities. The first half hour is really just human connection. We eat, they're catered by a local restaurant, hopefully school connected restaurant. So in Lacey, we use Mi Pueblo and they have kids in North Thurston Public Schools. So we want to foster that connection. So we eat together. And then we have a focus topic that's relevant, something really relevant to subs. And the way I really refined these focus topics is in Washington State, because we had all these emergency certified subs that flooded our ranks, our state superintendent of public instruction started paying attention to that and started supporting subs. They sent out a survey to all of those emergency certified subs and they asked, "What do you need?" And I got to go through all that survey data and I came up with 10 topics or 10 areas where subs really need support. So obviously you probably could guess that one of them is behavior management. How do subs meet big behaviors in the classroom when we don't have relationship and we don't have a lot of time? What are the things we can do to either prevent or meet those behaviors? How to connect quickly with students. Again, we might have you for an hour or maybe 43 minutes. I subbed today in an elementary school library and I had them for 27 minutes, I think. So you need strategies to connect really quickly because you do not have the luxury of time as a sub. No sub plans is another big topic. No sub plans, what do you do if you don't have a background in education and you have an entire day in front of you with no plan? So these are the focus topics that we use for our sub-community gatherings. And then we also embed really high yield social, emotional, and instructional strategies throughout the gathering so that are replicable. So for example, attention getters. I might start the gathering saying, "If you can hear me, take a deep breath." And everybody takes a deep breath. And then that's not only a way for me to get their attention, it's something they can stick in their pocket and use tomorrow when they're subbing in second grade. We embed these throughout the gathering, and it's really storytelling focused. It was really important to me when I was designing this, that they would be facilitated by subs that are regionally substitute teaching. So I facilitated mine here in my region where I sub, but I do not facilitate the ones that happen in Seattle, or the one that happens in Mount Lake Terrace, or we just started one in Yakima, which is kind of the middle of the state. So we have facilitators that are regionally working in the classroom as subs. We have some of our facilitators are full-time classroom teachers who used to be subs. Some of them are paras that used to be subs, or they're para subs. So it's a little bit diverse, but everyone's a practitioner who's leading the gathering. They choose the focus topic, and each person, let's say the focus topic is how to meet big behaviors as a substitute teacher. If I'm facilitating with my colleague, so I used to facilitate with my colleague Dina Lee Damapala, and she's a preschool sub, and I tried to mostly sub in secondary. So I might share a story about how do I actually meet big behaviors in a high school classroom. And it might be a story where I fell flat on my face, or it might be a story where the strategy worked. And then Dina Lee will share a story about how does she meet big behaviors with little people in a kindergarten or a pre-K classroom. And then we let the subs at the tables share their stories, because really it's the collective wisdom of all of us. That's how we grow. So they share their stories, then we have a share out all together. We kind of accumulate all the strategies together, and then we end.
This sounds fantastic, especially that it's happening on a state level. And
Yes.
that's something that might be of interest to other localities around the nation. One question I have for you is, how did you connect with the Washington Education Association to be running this program statewide? And what have you found to have been the successes in scaling out this substitute program statewide? And where are the remaining challenges?
When my colleague Amanda and I first started, and then Dina Lee came alongside and we were doing this together, I started an Instagram account about it. And honestly, we were meeting in, Amanda owns restaurants, and we were meeting in the back room of one of her restaurants because she let us use it for free. And people were buying their own food, and some people were buying alcohol, and it was a different vibe. And I always joke that people thought that I think they thought I was going to try and sell them a condo at the end. People didn't understand what we were doing. And because we were doing it out of desperation. I was subbing next door. I subbed next door to this gentleman who was trying so hard, but he was yelling at the kindergartners. And I asked him what was going on. And he said, I wrote the instructions on the board so clearly, and they just aren't following them. And I had to explain to this really nice gentleman that they could not read. So there was this feeling of desperation, like we really need to help these people. So I had an Instagram. I was sharing subbing tips and ideas for people who might not have a background in education. And when I was an instructional coach and a teacher leader, I was a national board certified teacher. And I also worked as a national board facilitator, and I helped other people get their national board. And during that work, I worked with Jim Meadows, who works for WEA. So he heard about what we were doing, and WEA, our teachers union here in Washington, had just received a grant from our Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction to support substitute teachers. And WEA, our union, is really good about understanding that practitioners are the key to helping practitioners. And so they really came alongside us and partnered with us as substitutes who are actually out in the classrooms. And they funded our project. And I'll say one of the ways that I feel like partnering with our union made everything so much better and stronger was in the area of equity and inclusion. When we were doing this on no budget whatsoever, we were holding it where we could. It just wasn't as accessible. And when I started partnering with WEA, they already had someone working with substitutes, who was a substitute coordinator in the Renton Public Schools, Anika Farrell, and she sat down with me and really helped redesign it and change it to make it more equitable. So we started meeting at the Lacey Community Center. And granted, we needed money to do this. Substitute teaching, there's no way we were ever going to take money from a substitute teacher. Substitute teaching is not a living wage job. There is no
Right.
sub out there who should be paying for professional development. So we knew that much. But partnering with the union, who had received money from our state, made it so that we could rent this community center. So it was really accessible to more people. It made it so that we could cater using local restaurants and treat subs as valued professionals. I know as a teacher, I received PD and I got lunch with that PD, and it feels like a small thing, and it's not, and it makes you feel respected and it makes you feel honored as a professional. And that is one of our core intentions in sub communities, is to treat subs as valued professionals, because we don't get treated that way very often, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, I think you're right. So what are you finding then, Megan, in terms of, because this is, I think, a model that could be replicated, like I was saying before, in other locations. What's going really, really well with these substitute meetings that you're having, the professional development that you're doing across the state? And where are the opportunities? Where are you going to take this work next?
Well, right now we are scaling it, which is really exciting. So we started here in Lacey, and we were holding them here, and our numbers were huge. Our first sub community, like when we were doing it in the back room of the restaurant and people were paying, we would have 10 or 12 subs, and it was still wonderful, and they were growing, and we had a chance to really kind of fine tune our ideas and our topics. When we moved it to the Lacey Community Center, we partnered. I reached out to all our local sub coordinators, told them about it. We had 60, 75 subs sign up and attend. So now we are holding these gatherings in 8 different locations in Washington State. I have a cadre of 10 subs and classroom teachers who I've been able to train to deliver professional development and to use this model. And so they have the model, but they also have the freedom to change it a little bit. I know, as someone who delivered PD, it's not fun to go and do somebody else's slides. It's not the same. So we created a flexible model where those facilitators got some training and they get to make it their own, and it gets to be specific to their region. And they are really invested in it, and it's growing like crazy. And so the last thing that we're finally getting over into Eastern Washington, which is really exciting. We just held our first Yakima sub community. The challenge is it's kind of a funny challenge. People are so surprised when I reach out to substitute coordinators and ESD partners, or anyone I can find who's in charge of substitutes. And to be honest, sometimes there's nobody at the district level who's in charge of substitutes, and that's a really big deal. We partner also with another organization out of California called Substantial Classrooms. They're doing really interesting and important work, and they have a platform called SubSchool that's really effective for online training for subs if you can't get to a gathering. But their data says that the average K-12 student in America spends about 1 full year with a substitute. So it's sad that it is very surprising when I reach out to these individuals and I say, this is a professional learning community for substitutes. And people are like, for substitutes? Because it's not something we've ever done before. But our landscape is so different now. So I think one of the challenges is just really reaching those people in human resources, or finding those people who are in charge of subs, so that we can offer this opportunity and build this community, this kind of affinity space for substitutes.
A lot of what you said there, I think, is important. I mean, I knew, per what I said when we started our conversation, that more students were experiencing subs for a longer period of time. I didn't realize it was that much time. That's pretty staggering, that a full year, if we think about the amount of learning that could and should be happening in that year, and our students maybe or maybe not are being provided with substitutes that know what they're doing or not know what they're doing.
Mhm.
That's scary because it's really the luck of the draw, especially if it's not a long-term sub, who you're getting in a classroom on a Monday. I'm glad that we're having this conversation because in this changing landscape, we are seeing teachers leave. But yet, at the same time, I think there is an opportunity here because by you providing the training for these substitutes, hopefully they are going to feel more in command of what they're doing and be better role models for students. So that actually leads me, Megan, to my next question. I know you mentioned that a lot of your substitutes are actually retired educators, and that's another great thing because it keeps these educators vested in our students, which is a good thing. And I think there is definitely something to be learned intergenerationally as well. Are you finding in these meetings that you're having, in these teams that you're having, that any substitutes are becoming either long-term substitutes in a stable position and or any actually going to get certified to be classroom teachers? What are you finding there?
So our data says that approximately 30% of all substitute teachers want to pursue full-time certificated teaching. So about 30% of them are interested in becoming a full-time teacher. So when I think about our sub-community gatherings, I look at them as teacher recruitment, to be quite honest. A good portion of those people are, as you said, they're trying this out because they're interested in making this their career. The other thing I'll say around just that idea of teacher recruitment, teacher retention, you mentioned teachers leaving the profession. I also see our sub-community gatherings and just the idea of building a really strong substitute teacher pool in your district as really effective teacher retention. What's been happening since we went back to in-person learning after online learning during the pandemic is that teachers are missing their planning periods because there are no subs. I think it's gotten a little bit better, but right after we went back to in-person learning, there was such a sub shortage. And the subs we did have were covering these long term. So we had none of the drop-in subs. Teachers were covering, and I know it's still happening in my district. Teachers were covering for one another on their planning periods, and administrators were starting the day by spending at least an hour going through and checking and seeing who could cover what and creating this puzzle. And we still do it. When there isn't a sub, administrators spend their time covering or figuring out who can cover, and it just is a domino effect. When you as a classroom teacher miss your planning period, it's demoralizing and people are leaving the profession because of that. So I really see our subs, these sub-community gatherings that we have, it's kind of twofold. It's teacher recruitment because a lot of these individuals want to be full-time teachers in your district and we need that. And it's also teacher retention. Teachers who know that they can get sick, that they can leave when their kid gets sick, that they can take care of an aging parent. There is a sub there for them that will be equipped and that will be able to actually teach their students. If teachers have that security, then they stay in their jobs and they don't burn out.
Teaching, it's like a bathtub without a stopper. You can put as much emphasis as you want on bringing people into the profession. But if you're not stopping them from leaving the profession, you're never going to be able to shut off that tap. So the fact that, yes, you are developing new educators, but at the same time, you can use these new educators, or while they're still subs, to be covering the classes so teachers can have their prep, or they can go visit a colleague. And I'm glad you mentioned that because I do a lot of work in my coaching work, Megan, where I recommend to teachers, well, let's do lesson study. Let's go see how this teacher does X. And the big pushback I get is, well, we don't have coverage. We don't have coverage. I'm glad that you highlighted the retention part as much as the recruitment part, because that's something I think that is often not discussed as much as it should be when we're talking about substitutes. And to your point before, this this two-prong approach really shows that we do need to prioritize substitutes in a way that we haven't in the past.
I look at it as an untapped resource. So another thing that the WEA, the Washington Education Association, is offering in addition to our sub community gatherings, which are led by subs and they're just for subs, we're also having these things called subposiums. They let me name everything, so they all have really cheesy names. But the subposium is for those substitute connected professionals. We talk about sub communities, why they're so powerful is because subs never ever get a chance to be in the same room together. We just don't. We're all out at these different schools and we're bouncing around. And if we happen to see each other, in the hallway, we wave. And imagine, this is one of the reasons I started these. I tried to imagine how I would have survived as a classroom teacher, if I never got to talk to other classroom teachers about my job. I wouldn't have made it past a month, I don't think. So subs need to talk to other subs about their job. And we made a room for them to get together and do just that. It's a PLC for subs. We also recognize that substitute coordinators and those HR professionals or professionals in a district or an ESD who are in charge of the subs, they also never get a chance to talk to other people who do their jobs. So we have these subposiums for those people, and we give them professional development and we offer them some opportunities to network and how can we support our subs? One of the easiest things is just meet them. Go out to the schools and meet some of your subs. And so we offer them some strategies too. The other thing we offer is a sub academy, and we're having one next weekend in Yakima. And we offer sessions on, I'm doing a session on how subs can use social emotional strategies to regulate themselves in the classroom. I have this theory that our number one job as subs is social emotional learning, because we are dysregulation. Us being in the classroom is dysregulating to students because their teacher isn't there. And that's a mini crisis. And depending on the developmental level of the student, that could be a major crisis to have your teacher gone. So I always say that the first job of the sub is to come in and just make sure everyone's okay, and do that social emotional learning, that connection, maybe some breathing exercises. Then you can actually access the academic content. So I'm teaching a class on that. There's also classes on specifically for subs who want to pursue pathways to becoming certificated teachers. So we have coaches that are going to come in and sit down with those subs and help them navigate the really complicated pathways to becoming a certificated teacher. In Washington, I'm sure it's all over the place, but it's tricky and you need help.
You're doing all these wonderful projects and initiatives. What are 2 or 3 things that you would recommend to a school or a smaller district that doesn't have access to this state, like I said, the state programming? What are 2 or 3 high leverage strategies you would recommend to schools and or districts to help their substitute better?
That's a great question. The first thing I would suggest is make sure you don't have access. I would reach out to your local union, your teachers union, and your superintendent of public instruction or your state, whatever your state education, and see if there isn't money there to support. So I would do that first. But there are definitely things that small school districts can do to support their subs better. So some of the high leverage practices, I've seen substitute coordinators in a district decide to send out a newsletter to their subs where they kind of systematize things, because they might not have a really regular way that they're communicating with their subs in their district, and telling them, updating them about how we've changed the weather response system here, or create something that you can send out to your subs regularly. The inverse of that would be ask for feedback from your subs. Subs rarely have an opportunity to say, hey, my job would be a lot better if X, Y, or Z happen. So if you are a school district and you have substitute teachers, the person in charge of them could create a Google form where you just ask, hey, what's going well for you as a sub? What are a couple ways we could support you better as a sub? And just send that out and collect some data, get some real-time data. That's free. That's a free and easy way to support your substitutes in your school district. I think before that, one of the first steps a lot of school districts have to take, and it's a very humbling step, is really finding out, is there somebody in charge of the subs in your school district? Because we have a huge missing manager syndrome when it comes to subs in a lot of school districts. There isn't a manager, there isn't anyone who's in charge of the subs. So that's another great first step. Find out if there's somebody who's in charge of the subs, and then support that person.
Megan, is there anything we haven't talked about that you feel our listeners should know?
This is one of our sub-community topics, is technology. I just ran into it today because I was subbing in a library, elementary school library, and I needed to check out books. And so subs are the forgotten people. People forget about us, and we know we're forgotten. It's okay. But there are certain times when forgetting us can almost be unsafe. I've had experiences where I'm subbing in a high school classroom and there's a lockdown, and over the intercom, I hear, teachers, check your email. And I don't have an email, or I don't have a laptop. I don't have access to it and my phone is blocked. So remembering your subs is such an important and critical first step.
Now, Megan, where else can people find out more about you and the work that you do? And you better mention your Good Morning America spot too.
I know, we were just on Substantial Classrooms, and I were both just featured on Good Morning America for the work we're doing with substitute teachers, and that was really fun. So I have a website, ConklinEP.com. Conklin Educational Perspectives is the name. And I also have Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Threads accounts that are Conklin Educational Perspectives, and I share subbing tips. My colleague Dina Lee Damapala and I share subbing tips and things for people there. I would also really recommend that everybody go to the Washington Education Association's Emergency Substitute Teacher Project webpage. That has links to, it has a little video about our sub-community gatherings. It explains how the project is funded through our state Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction. And I just think that's helpful. So if in your state, maybe you're thinking, hey, maybe this is something that we could make happen, that would be a really good resource.
Again, thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, thank you.
Have a great night.
You too.
Thank you for listening today. I hope you got some great tips that you can bring back into your teaching. Remember, have a life teaching without sacrificing your own. Also, don't forget to subscribe and be well.